Welcome to the Authority File. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. For the last few Authority File series, I've been telling you all about our new podcast called Patron Driven. It's coming up in late June, and we're really excited for you to hear it. It's going to be much different than the Authority File. It's a lot like the narrative-style podcast many of you have probably listened to. It's much more story-driven. Season 1 is a 5-part series that follows 4 librarians through the destruction of the Lone Star College Kingwood Library after Hurricane Harvey, the 2 years it took to rebuild, and the new space, services, and relationships that emerged from it all. It's such a great story. It's got drama, grit, perseverance, and it's a terrific library success story. Patron Driven debuts in late June, wherever you get your podcasts. You can visit our website, choice360.org, to learn more about it. Just click on the librarianship drop-down to find the Patron Driven landing page where you can access more info and sign up for email updates. While you're there, you'll find behind-the-scenes bonus content for the new program, and you can check out the new trailer for the upcoming series. Okay, so back to the Authority File. We've got another great set of episodes on deck, and my guest for the next several weeks is Sarah Todd, who, along with Sebastian Savard, co-edited the book Canadian Perspectives on Community Development, published by the University of Ottawa Press. Through its contributed pieces, the book takes an incredibly thorough look at how community work is practiced in Canada. As you can imagine, community work in Canada, but anywhere really, is complex, which gives rise to a diverse set of practices that makes it difficult to think of a quote-unquote Canadian approach to social work. This is what Sarah and Sebastian address in their book, looking for the through lines in that complexity of community development, particularly in forging new pathways of communication between Anglophone and Francophone communities. In this second episode, brought to you by the University of Ottawa Press, Sarah talks about how theory and practice inform the book and how combining practice and theory can advance community work efforts. You note in your introduction that Canadian community organizers tend to, quote, make sense of their experiences, unquote, through American and or British theories. But then there's little literature that then looks at how those theories are recontextualized after they're applied in a Canadian context. Also, there tends to be a lack of communication, as you said, between Francophone and Anglophone groups with respect to their own approaches to community development. So I'm wondering, what are the impacts that these issues, including with similar issues in approaches to Indigenous peoples, how are those impacting the practice of community work?
So I often try to think about theory as a way of knowing, right? A way of knowing about our world, a way of knowing about people, and about a way of imagining change. And that's, I think, most useful when you don't see theory as sort of a fixed thing, but rather as a way of entering a conversation in practice. And what I think happens is because we draw upon British and American theories and then sort of leave them as the way they are and don't have conversations about how they change when they're brought into the Canadian context. Mm-hmm. We both forget the richness of how theory shapes our practice, but also have a way of forgetting that we invigorate and create new theory and new ways of knowing in that interaction. And so the challenge here is when we're not having conversations, when we're not looking at various ways of knowing and being really aware of how they're shaping how we move in the world, we start to think our way of knowing is a truth and as a fact, and we start to lose the sort of flexibility that lets us be adaptable and see ourselves as creating realities, not just responding to them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm wondering, in respect to your book specifically, how have practice and theory informed your book? You note the lack of theory available, at least in a Canadian context, as well as a need for a much more multidimensional practical approach, I would think. In what ways have you combined practice and theory to help these issues within your title?
So I think what the book does is each author articulates the kinds of theories they work with and use to make sense of very specific practices with very specific communities.
Hmm.
And so, um, and by making that really visible and that interaction visible, it gives an opportunity to ask questions about it. And in fact, in the collection, chapters and authors ask questions about theories used by other um, authors in the collection. So you have um, somebody using queer and trans theory, sort of speaking to some of the limits of anti-oppressive and feminist theory when used in specific community contexts. Um, and then you see other authors articulating how those theories work in the context that they're working in. So what it highlights in the collection is both the value of a wide range of theories, but the partiality of all those theories, so that theory makes visible certain things and creates certain blind spots. And the more we have collections like this, which can highlight those, and not as a problem with theory, but just as something one always has to keep aware of, it lets our practice um, become more self-aware and self-conscious. And I think that one of the challenges of community practice is it's often outsiders who have the privilege of university education going in to work with highly marginalized communities. And um, and one of the dangers of that is you think that the theory you carry out at the university, you know more or know better than the community. And this collection is a way to teach that theory offers something and has value to that practice, but it must always be in conversation with the community members themselves. It must resonate with their reality, that these are conversational approaches. Um, and that as somebody in practice and an advanced practitioner, one has to always be open to the possibility that your theory may be wrong and it may not work, and that you have to create the openness and the humility for the community to tell you that and for you to hear that and pivot and change in your practice.
That's you make a great point there, Sarah. I think it's sounding to me like that. And this sounds obvious, but I mean, a community is a very organic thing, and it's constantly changing and evolving. So as you say, those sort of blind spots that kind of crop up in within specific theories that are taught in the university um, can also present opportunities, I think, and sort of as as I think you were referring to some of the authors in the book question um, some of the other chapter authors
Mm-hmm.
in the sense of how one theory may only go so far in a certain practical kind of application within the community setting, but then that kind of helps push the development of or advance the practice of community work, I would think, in certain ways, as folks, um, as practitioners, kind of, you know, extend or find ways to expand particular theories or practices to fit a very specific slice of a community they're working within. Does that
Mm-hmm.
make sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And I think, I talk in the book a little bit, Sebastian and I have discussed that, theory is a map that can help you from getting lost and help you when you feel lost, but it's a general direction. The specific roads and paths you take uh, you, with a community require that the community help shape that road and path.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a danger when your theory becomes so much part of you that you just think it is the truth or common sense. And the book sort of unsettles that, because authors take very different approaches and use very different understandings of the state, of social change, about how to conceptualize a problem. So you have, an author like Jane Koo saying it's really a problem when we organize around immigrants and migrant workers, and we have all these categories that are created by the state, and we let those create separation. And then you have Sato and Est who take those divisions and use anti-oppressive practice to really mobilize those communities. So it's not that one position is right or wrong. It's that it depends on the moment and the community and what you're striving for. And keeping those in conversation keeps us humble and really aware of that in our work, which I think is helpful for the project remaining critically aware and heading to an idea of social justice.
Okay. So we've kind of talked a little bit about how sort of theories can, in many cases, only go so far in actual practice in the real world. But even all the same, you're putting a lot of emphasis on a theoretical approach to community work, and it's obviously very important. I'm wondering if you can explain why that is. Why is theory so important to community work?
Yeah, that's a helpful question. So I think one of the great American community organizers, Saul Alinsky, really highlighted this for us, and that's he really critiqued a lot of social work as going in on as an arm of the state to make people in poverty, particularly, just learn to live with the consequences of inequality rather than agitating. And I think that's a helpful caution. Community work is about a series of activities and practices and skills and techniques that are not either wholly good or wholly bad. It depends to what purpose they are being used, and they can be really hopeful or dangerous depending on their aims and the context. And so the problem that Sebastian and I see when you don't think about community practice in a sort of highly theoretical way is that you can forget about reflecting on what we're actually aiming for in the bigger picture. So, there have been great community organizers that have organized human beings to do terrible things. And there have been great community organizers that have organized communities to do wonderful things that head us towards social justice. And so what theory offers is that roadmap, that sort of general direction of checking in. Are these activities and techniques and activities that I'm doing, to what purpose are we heading? And, to return to Saul Alinsky, to really question when we're being paid by the state, which is often the case in Canada. We have a less of a philanthropic history than you do in the States. When you're being paid by the state, is what you're doing actually creating more equality, or is it just making people settle down and live with the conditions of inequality that they're becoming accustomed to? So it lets us ask those critical questions of the work that we're doing.
You just heard from Sarah Todd. Sarah is professor and director of the School of Social Work at Carleton University in Ottawa. She is also a 3M teaching fellow. She is the co-editor of Canadian Perspectives on Community Development, along with Sebastian Savard, who is full professor and interim director of the School of Social Work at the University of Ottawa. Canadian Perspectives on Community Development is published by the University of Ottawa Press. This episode is brought to you by the University of Ottawa Press. Join us next week when we continue our conversation and talk about how the relationship between the state and local service providers is impacting the practice of community work.
Oftentimes that perception as the state being rigid and inflexible and sort of heavy is sometimes how I think about it. And then the community being quite agile and flexible and open is one dynamic that plays out. At the same time, in the book and in reality, I think sometimes it is the community that is rigid, the community that has really fixed boundaries and closed down, and it's having trouble opening up and seeing possibilities. And it is state actors who are coming in and saying, you need to think about new ways of working and imagining yourselves and open up the boundaries.
If you like what you hear, rate us or give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. And if there's a topic you'd like us to cover, drop me a line. I'm at bmickey@ala-choice.org. As always, sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced by Choice's senior digital media producer, Mark Dirks, and digital media assistant, Sabrina Kofer. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.